Our next guest is an Emmy award-winning podcast host that you may know from The Ringer, Takeline, or Binge Mode, and he's now the host of Crooked Media's X-Ray Vision, a new weekly podcast that transcends pop culture and entertainment and everything in between. Please welcome Jason Concepcion to the South by Southwest studio.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be here.
Thank you, sir, for being here.
Yeah.
All right, let's start with the newest podcast,
Okay.
X-Ray Vision. What's it about?
X-Ray Vision is about the kind of big stories that are happening now in pop culture with the kind of confluence of comics and movies, just nerd culture stuff, Marvel movies, DC properties, all that kind of stuff.
So basically it's for me.
Yeah, sure. It's for a lot of people. These are billion-dollar movies, so it's for.
I feel like
many
the
people on
$1 billion
planet.
with the pinky on the $1 billion, and it's not just you. You're co-hosting it with Rosie Knight.
Rosie Knight, the great Rosie Knight.
She couldn't be here with us today because she's right there.
That's right.
Yeah. Why'd you choose Rosie?
Because Rosie knows more about comics than almost anyone.
That's a big statement, sir.
I know a lot about comics. A lot of people I talk with, or they're in my life know a lot about comics, but Rosie knows more. Rosie just knows a lot about this stuff.
And I was reading the description. It's about what creates it's the zeitgeistiest of the zeitgeist. That's what you guys focus on, correct?
Yes, all the stuff that's happening right now, that's huge right now, like nerd stuff, comic book movies are the biggest movies in the world right now, and they are the movies that continue to get people in this kind of like post-COVID, mid-COVID reality that actually get people to go to the movies still.
What do you think, when it comes to either sports, music, comic books, movies, what creates the zeitgeist?
It's a great question. I think a lot of it is that for these stories have been going on since, the 40s at the big two comic publishers, DC and Marvel.
Even before then, actually.
And before then, right? So you've got all these stories just kind of like building up. And it's only been semi-recently that like technology got to the point where you could actually tell these stories in a way that honored the way they were told in the comics. So now you have this explosion of stuff. And with that, you've got like this backlog of fans, generations of fans have been like waiting for this stuff. Yeah, like have been waiting for these movies to be told in this way, and now you're finally seeing it.
I remember growing up, we had Superman, Chris Reeve's Superman. You look back at it now, you're like, a little outdated, but still well done. But I remember it was Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man that came out when computer technology had caught up with where we are right now. We're like, you can actually maybe pull this off for Spider-Man can be seen swinging through New York.
Yes.
And that was huge for us.
It was absolutely huge. And what the Marvel movies, the MCU has done is say, okay, instead of like we do 3 Spider-Man movies, then we get a new actor, we reboot it from ground zero, let's just start it and never stop. We're bringing all these characters into the universe so that there's this ongoing kind of rollicking, very messy, but very expansive, ongoing reality that just never stops expanding and going. And that was really kind of like the big bang moment for the current state of comic book movies.
Yeah, and specifically you're talking about when Kevin Feige took over.
Yeah.
And he started with Iron Man.
Yes.
And people are like, Iron Man, B-movie character, Robert Downey Jr. I'm old enough to remember when it was first announced, people were like, why?
There was a not infamous, but there's the article from the Hollywood Reporter at the time that was like, here's the C list, like
There you go.
the DC movies, they have Batman, they have Superman, like they have these great characters, and this is like Captain America and Hawkeye and Thor, and like who cares? And that turned out to be extremely wrong. But that was the kind of common thinking at the time was who cares about these level characters?
And it just shows you if you actually get a good team behind the character, any character, a B-list character, a C-list character, can go supernova.
Absolutely, and what is great about comics, and specifically the kind of like style and era of comics that Kevin Feige's managed to shepherd onto the big screen, is you have this opportunity for just massive crossovers, like the Avengers team, a team-up movie of these great characters that normally would just like have a standalone solo movie, just have Thor, and Thor would just go along and have its Thor 1, Thor 2, Thor 3. It would never intersect with anybody else. Like in the comics, these characters team up, and through that, you get a sense of actually how vast this storytelling landscape can be.
It's a, so I read comic books.
Yes.
I'm here confessing that I read comic books.
You don't need to do that anymore.
This
It's
is a
like,
safe space.
it's cool now.
Basically, this is the only time in the last week I actually have a safe space and talk to someone else. Everyone else is like, okay, watch, great. I have my monthly pull box. I get my.
You're legit then.
I'm legit. They know me by name at the comic book store. What comic books are you reading right now?
Oh my gosh. What am I reading right now?
Rosie's watching, so.
Yeah, I'm reading like all the X stuff. I'm reading Daredevil as Daredevil is like my standby since I began. I'm reading.
Since you began reading comics?
Since I began reading comics.
When was that?
Like 1990?
Wow.
89, 90?
Same here.
I went to the Philippines when I was a child, like 10, and one of my cousins had Iron Man, Uncanny X-Men, Captain America, Avengers, West Coast Avengers, all bound like Encyclopedia Britannica. And that was my introduction to comics as a collector. Previous to that, it was just like whenever I was in the drugstore, grab like whatever was there that grabbed my attention. This was the first time I realized, oh, they're just like an ongoing story that just goes. And so I just read all those. And when I got back to the States, I dove in. And so those are, X-Men, Avengers, Spider-Man I'm reading, all the X books basically I'm reading.
And for those who aren't following the X books right now, you should. It's been pretty remarkable in the past year.
It's been a real revitalization ever since it's just been like an amazing revitalization from the X-Men the previous paradigm was mutants as this kind of oppressed people that were almost hounded to like the edge of extinction. There was only 200 some odd left of them at one point, and now they are colonizing space. They have several islands in the Pacific that are theirs. They live on Mars. Like it's an incredible come up for the mutant kingdom.
And it's interesting what happens when the oppressed potentially become the oppressor.
Yeah. Oh yes.
And I think we're seeing that right now.
Yes, that is an ongoing storyline, and it's really fun.
When people say, you're a grown man, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life? What are you doing with your life, Jason?
This is this is like the paradigm shift of now, right? I mean, the comic book movies are the biggest thing. This is what gets people to the movie theaters
and
right
multi-billion-dollar business.
Multi-billion-dollar business that has totally paradigm shifted the economics of movies.
But also culture, right?
Completely. This used to be like, from my era, you didn't really talk about collecting comics. You know what I mean? Like
I did, but they used to laugh at me.
Right.
Yes.
The people, my friends that also collected comics were the people I talked about it with. But it's not like a thing you really did. And I stopped like for a while because it was like, I guess, not cool. For like 5 or 6 years, I'd like transitioned out of it.
Late 90s?
Yeah, like late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah. But then I got back into it with Ultimate Marvel. That got me back on the train. And then, the fact is that you don't have to hide it anymore. These are the biggest properties in the world. These are the things that get people actually to go to the movies anymore. There's a whole class of movie that kind of like doesn't exist as like a theater-going proposition anymore. It is these comic book movies that get people to go. And so, we've reached a point where it's like you don't have to be like, you don't have to pretend that you like this stuff.
You've heard the criticism from
Sure.
Coppola, Scorsese, others. They're like, cinema's now Marvel movies, spandex movies, the same stuff over and over again, and it's drowned out the market for any other auteur. Now, again, for a fan, you're like, your response to that?
My response to that is it would be a really weird world if Martin Scorsese was like, I love Marvel movies. I'm trying to do
That's
Martin
an
Scorsese's
excellent
voice.
Martin Scorsese impression. Those
I love it. I love Captain America. I love Daredevil. I love Spider-Man. I want to see more X-Men. Sorry, that was what I imagined Martin Scorsese talking about comic book. It would be really weird if they liked it. It's like a generational thing. I don't begrudge them their biases or the fact that they don't like these movies. That's absolutely fine. I do think that it's a little, if you don't like mafia movies, like I suppose like I could take the the converse proposition and be like, well, like if I don't like mafia movies, then how am I going to like your stuff? But like it's a generational thing, and I think it's fine that they don't like it.
But the thing is this, right? And this is me as a comic book fan.
Yeah.
Right? That used to dream about seeing Spider-Man
Yes.
and Daredevil on the screen.
Yeah.
Even now, I'm like, just slow your roll, Hollywood.
Really?
Because it's like not just movies, but it's TV shows. Like everything is superhero. Like everything is. And
Yeah.
there's a part of me that says quality over quantity. I want quality. Right? Because when they bum rush this stuff out, it's
That's
not
true.
done well. It pains me.
Well-
It pains my soul.
Here's where I will lightly push back, or at least say that it's kind of amazing what specifically Feige has done in the movie space, which is like there's a few kind of bad Marvel movies. You know, Thor: The Dark World is like kind of
Thor:
bad.
The Dark World, not good.
Yeah. But there are good parts of it. Doctor Strange, I think, is problematic in interesting ways. But by and large, these movies are at least pretty good. And certainly,
they're not they're all watchable.
They're all very, very watchable. So there's this like incredible consistency baseline that they've managed to hit, and they've also done something that I think is really smart, which is like port over the crossover mechanic from comics, so that listen, you can put out 2 bad Thor movies. Like I'll call them bad, even though I like the first Thor movie. Thor: The Dark World has its moments, even though it's bad. And then you come out with Thor: Ragnarok, the third movie being like far and away the best movie, so that it makes all those other movies relevant. It's in other words, the great movies pull up the level of the kind of like not good movies, and they've really imported that structure from Marvel Comics, from DC Comics, from comics in general, where because of the crossovers, you kind of need to know about all the little stuff, and it's kind of lifted the quality of everything they're doing, and it makes this really like vibrant, interconnected universe that is all pretty good. Like even the bad stuff is pretty good.
Well, that's what's really interesting is that it builds. There's a foundation.
Yeah.
There's intentionality. That
Yeah.
took 10 years. They created
Yeah.
a universe. Avengers took a while.
Yeah.
It's like almost rewards the viewer for paying attention. And then not only that, speaking about crossover, you're
Yeah.
crossing over generations and different studios with, spoiler alert, the latest Spider-Man, where, spoiler alert, you get Tobey Maguire,
Yes.
Garfield, and this young, who's the latest Spider-Man?
Tom Holland.
Tom Holland.
Yeah.
All of them together at the same
Yeah.
time. So it rewards like 20 years worth of geekery.
I mean, there's a huge backlog because, as Rosie and I were talking about earlier today, it's only semi-recently that technology caught up to these stories in a way that allowed these stories to be told in a way that didn't look hokey or weird. I mean, you look at some of like like Daredevil when he appeared on like the Hulk NBC like primetime special, and it's like the costume looked bad, the special effects weren't good. The technology is caught up so that you could tell these stories in a way that's immersive. So you have this like huge backlog of decades and decades and decades of stories that are like now just like coming through. And that's even before like the X-Men and the Fantastic Four like arrive on the scene with Marvel, 2 of the biggest and most important like teams in the Marvel universe. So there's still levels that this can go, which is amazing.
I'm going to get to DC for a second, but
Sure.
how bad was Josh Trank's Fantastic Four?
I mean, like epically, incredibly bad. Not just the product that arrived on the screen with like 2 different color wigs in the same movie and stuff, but it was like a famous Hollywood meltdown of an auteur that will be talked about in like production circles for years to come.
And I think people forget that Trank was riding high off the movie Chronicle. He was given a Fantastic Four, which
Chronicle is great.
which is really good. And
Yeah.
he was about to do Star Wars, but his meltdown on Fantastic Four was so bad that they're like, we're gonna go in a different direction.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't have given him the keys this early. Yeah, you know.
I like Fantastic Four, so once I saw it, I'm like, I always give, even though I'm critical, I say, it won't be that bad. And when I saw that movie, I'm like, no, this is remarkable.
I mean, there's
This
two
is
different
bad.
there's 2 different color wigs in the movie. It's very, very tough.
All right, so DC, Warner Brothers and DC realizes that Kevin Feige and Disney and Marvel have just made billions of dollars with Avengers.
Hard to ignore. Yeah.
Yeah, right? Okay, we got to do it. How did they mess it up so bad originally?
Well, I think that weirdly, the track of these 2 companies mirrors the way the kind of like comics have unfolded. we were talking about this earlier, Rosie and I. DC did the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, essentially because like they had like this very messy continuity that they needed to like straighten. Marvel came in, decades after DC in the 60s, and was able to like from the ground up kind of more intentionally and more logically build their universe. And it's interesting to see how that same kind of dynamic has played out in their movie-making propositions, where DC is kind of like all over the place with the most recent Batman, which is like really, really fun.
I liked it.
I liked it a lot. Rosie and I both loved it. But where exactly it fits in the continuity of the existing things that they are putting out is yet to be determined. But that's exactly how DC Comics, as a publishing proposition, has operated for years, where it's like, Batman the Dark Knight, where does that exist in continuity? Don't worry about it. Here it is. Superman Red Sun, don't worry about it. Like, it just exists.
It's just good content.
It's just good content, a good story. How does it connect to the DC universe writ large? Don't worry about it. Whereas Marvel, because they started later and because they had DC to kind of like look at and model against, created something that was a bit more streamlined and intentional in the way they deployed their multiverse. Less as a we need to clean this all up, and more of a storytelling choice.
So when DC went away from that, they decided, they're like, look at what Marvel's doing. They're making so much money. We're gonna do Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice.
Dawn of Justice. Listen.
Were you a fan of that movie?
I was not a fan of that movie, but
Rosie was watching very intently.
I was not a fan of that movie, but the thing is, these two companies have ripped each other off so many ways and so many times that you actually can't figure out who ripped the other off first. There are characters that are clearly ripped off from Marvel that DC has. Lobo, for example, is just Wolverine. DC similarly has characters that Marvel has then just ripped off. It goes on to the point that it's hard to, even though it's easy to criticize DC for the kind of like stumbles and for not having the kind of overarching like Feige-like figure to kind of like curate and move everything on in a logical way. I find it very interesting that the way these two movie studios have evolved, the movie properties, has basically like traced the same kind of path that the comics evolved along.
As they dueled and inspired each other. Very, very quick with the DC movies, Wonder Woman 2. How do they mess up so bad? Like, it was just terrible.
Come on.
Come on.
I mean, yeah.
It's a leading question because it's terrible.
There were some good moments. I think that they need a Feige, basically. They need that kind of like overarching czar to say, this is how this movie is going to fit into the larger plan that we have. And they kind of don't have, DC kind of doesn't have that. They just kind of like release stuff in a unintentional, organic way, and they just need that figure. Will they find that figure? I don't know.
All right, quick questions. Favorite Marvel movie?
Favorite? Maybe Thor Ragnarok, but the best time I had in the theater ever was Marvel's The Avengers the first time, because that was like adrenaline through the roof.
Favorite DC movie?
Gosh. The original 1989 Batman.
Ooh. Worst DC movie?
Dawn of Justice.
Worst Marvel movie?
It pains me to say, but probably Captain Marvel.
Ooh, the worst?
Yeah, I think it might be. And which is unfortunate because there's good stuff in it.
The Marvel character that you desperately want to see on screen?
I mean, Wolverine and any X-Men at all.
DC.
Gosh. I mean, let's do the DC and Marvel symbiotic relationship again. I'll say Lobo.
Lobos. I mean, all
yeah,
right. So you were supposed to be here 3 years ago. We have a South by staffer, Monica Sack, who's a big fan of yours.
Oh, right.
She had a couple questions for you 3 years ago. We couldn't ask. With the 30 seconds I have left, I have to ask this. I'm doing it for you, Monica. She really wanted Zion for the Knicks, all right?
It may happen. Okay. It may happen.
So there you go.
never know.
She says this. She says, Jason, They didn't get him, but there were rumors that they might a month ago. Do you think they'll come to fruition? And who would you like to see play for the Knicks?
Listen.
Do you think it might happen?
I think there's a world in which it happens. We have R.J. Barrett, a college teammate of Zion. They're still famously friends. Zion has not played for the Pelicans this year. It is there are a lot of rumblings that they might not be able to keep him. I think it could very, very, very possibly happen. I think he could play for the Knicks. Who would I want for the Knicks? It doesn't matter, because anybody I want, they won't get. And I feel like if I say it, it'll jinx it.
Spoken like a true Knicks fan.
If I say it, it'll jinx it.
I love the resignation and the depression.
Yes.
I love it. Thank you so much. I could talk comics with you and sports with you. Next time, we're going to talk about the Warriors and the NBA. Thanks so much for being here. His new podcast, X-Ray Vision, with co-host Rosie Knight, is available on Apple and wherever you find your podcast, so check it out. You can also watch all of our studio interviews on the South by Southwest TV app, available on Apple TV, Roku, Android TV, and Amazon Fire. These interviews are also available on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/SXSW. And for a complete list of our interview schedule, check out sxsw.com/studio. I'm Majhat Ali, and thank you for watching.